Welcome to the Planet MicroCap Showcase Virtual 2022. I'm your host, Robert Kraft. Thank you all for joining us. Now presenting at our event is Dr. Faz Chaudhry. He's the CEO of Nemaura Medical. It's a publicly traded company. The symbol is NMRD on NASDAQ. Dr. Chaudhry, take it away.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for that introduction. And once again, thank you for inviting us to speak again. It's really a pleasure to be back here. So today I shall be giving you an update on the developments at Nemaura Medical. And as Robert mentioned, I'm Faz Chaudhry, CEO of Nemaura Medical. And initially, just to highlight that I will be making some, just one moment, I should be making some forward-looking statements. So if you can just take a look at that slide for a moment there. Okay, so let's dive straight into what is it, what's the area, what's the market that we're addressing? So when you look at the current, let's call it the pandemic of diabetes, you've got somewhere in the region of 450 million people around the world with diabetes. And there are, the numbers vary, but there are something like over 1 billion people with prediabetes, and a lot of them, of course, are then transitioning to type 2 diabetes. And then when we consider, for example, in the US alone, you've got almost 96 million people with prediabetes. And the cost of managing diabetes is substantial. It's many multiples of the normal costs of managing an individual. So the clinical need is immense. The question is, of course, how do we go about managing diabetes, the complications of diabetes, and in particular, given the sheer number of people that have prediabetes, how can we potentially prevent those individuals from becoming diabetic in the first place, or at least delay the chances of them becoming diabetic? And so as a company, what we've been working on over the last decade is a sensor platform, which consists of a transmitter and a daily wear sensor, as you can see in the picture there. And on the right there, you can see what the transmitter looks like once you've actually assembled that patch at the back of that transmitter. And the transmitter is something that you keep for maybe a couple of years. It's rechargeable, as you can see from the ports there. And the sensor is a daily wear sensor. And it is a world first non-invasive daily wear continuous glucose sensor. And our objective is to target the 400 million plus people around the world with type 2 diabetes, but also the billion plus people around the world with prediabetes. And I'll go on to speak about how we intend to target them with this wearable sensor platform. So initially, I'd like to give you an overview of what is it as a company that we were aiming to deliver, and what have we delivered thus far, and what are the future deliverables we're planning. First of all, our objective was to essentially develop this device as a arm-worn or wearable device in this form factor where you can literally just apply it on your upper arm. And of course, we completed that. We then went on to complete pivotal clinical studies and obtain CE approval in Europe as a Class IIb medical device. And again, we've completed that. We then went on to do user studies with our licensee in the UK, and that led on to purchase orders from the UK licensee for 200,000 sensors and 5,000 devices. And we're in the process of fulfilling those orders. So again, that was a big achievement for us. And recently we announced, I think roughly about a month ago, that the registration process in the Middle East was progressing quite well. And as a result of that, our Middle Eastern licensee has also placed a provisional order of 1.7 million sensors over the course of the next couple of years. So again, a big tick in the box from our perspective in terms of some of the targets that we had and what we've been able to deliver. So moving forward, the other targets that we had was, a while back, we realized that just selling sensors, whilst that certainly provides a lot of value to any company, by adding a digital element to it, something that will allow people to utilize it in order to manage their diabetes, would provide significant added benefits and therefore a much higher value proposition from our perspective. And so we developed a program called Beat Diabetes. And again, so that development was completed. And I will talk about the launch plans for that. And so the idea was that once we did that, we started pilot studies. And of course, the objective next is to commercialize it. When you consider In the US, there are similar programs that use invasive sensors and quite expensive sensors. And here we have a significant opportunity to be able to leverage off the low-cost, flexible wear sensor that we've developed. That is our proprietary technology that these other programs don't offer. And as a result, we entered into preliminary terms with Eversana, which is a company in the US with over 6,000 sales force. And the whole idea is that we are going to work with them to take our product to market in the US, mainly B2B. And the other target was, of course, submit to the FDA, and we submitted to the FDA, the PMA, and we've had the Biological Monitoring Office audit and the GMP manufacturer audit, and we will provide further updates in due course. So I guess in summary, what I'm saying is that over this last decade, we've done we've hit most of our targets, if not all of our targets, from the point of view of first developing and delivering something that was clinically viable, and then getting approvals, and then getting as far as getting purchase orders and becoming revenue generating. So we have really reached that inflection point where we now will be looking forward towards how do we capitalize on that by commercializing, and who do we partner with in order to do that. So our future targets are, we still continue on the path with the FDA to aim to get approvals from the FDA as a PMA Class 3 medical device in the US. Another target is to scale up sales in the UK and Middle East through our licensees, and then to also build market share in the US with employers and insurers in particular for our BEAT diabetes program, the diabetes management and reversal program. So those are, I would say, three of our key objectives. And then in addition to that, we also decided that whilst it was extremely, I guess, pertinent to our device to be able to develop a program in the diabetes space, there was a huge opportunity in the consumer market, in the consumer space, wearable sensors, prediabetes, metabolic health. And so we also are looking to exploit that market with regards to how a sensor can be used potentially as a preventative tool or just ensuring good health of individuals. And I shall mention a bit more about that in due course. And here's just a bit of data that we've had back, comparing our data to one of the invasive sensors. And here's what it looks like on the actual app. And the MSW brand is our UK licensee's brand. In terms of product positioning, as I've just mentioned, based on the deliverables and the targets that we've had, we've now got laser sharp focus on three core areas or three key offerings as a company. One is to scale manufacture of these devices and sensors and sell them through licensees and distributors around the world. The second is we've spent the last almost 3 years developing this thing called the BEAT diabetes program, and it is integrated with our sensors. And the objective here is that we will provide this as a diabetes management program, both for managing type 2 diabetes, as well as potentially even reversing type 2 diabetes. And the third target, as I just mentioned now, is to get into the consumer space with our sensor, which we can do by virtue of the fact that it is non-invasive and it is flexible in terms of where, i.e. a person can wear it on in any particular day, and really try to make significant inroads in that market whilst we have that first mover advantage, given that there isn't another sensor that is a daily wear, continuous, non-invasive sensor that's been approved anywhere in the world that we're aware of, at least at this point in time. So those are the three core areas that we believe will bring hopefully substantial value to the company and shareholders in due course as we gradually implement our commercialization strategy and plans. And of course, a lot of this will be done in partnership with other companies. So let's just quickly talk about those three again. So the medical market, again, it is through licensees. The objective here being that we scale up our manufacture of sensors and devices. Licensees, they make orders and we supply them. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, we've had orders for 200,000 sensors in the UK, and we've already started fulfilling the order for those devices. And there is another arrangement that we have with our UK licensee, whereby they also plan to give away sensors free of charge in conjunction with certain medications that are approved for people with diabetes. And of course, when you think about it, A, it's a no-brainer, and B, that's really the way healthcare is moving. When you consider that in the future, I think there will be a lot more there will be a lot more medicines that are prescribed, which then come with some kind of a test kit or a device or something that says, hey, at the end of every month or every quarter, test yourself with this, and let's see how well the medication is actually helping you. And here, of course, what you're doing is you put a sensor on maybe a couple of days at the end of each month, and you're maybe taking these medications on a daily basis. And what you're looking for is, well, to what extent have I reined in those fluctuations in my sugar level? And again, it's a very good way of validating the extent to which you're basically being able to manage your condition. And so that, again, we anticipate orders for in due course. And of course, as I mentioned, with the Middle East, we've received provisional orders for 1.7 million sensors over the next 2 years. And we expect that the registration will be completed, hopefully all being well, by the end of Q1 in 2023. And that will then lead to us starting to fulfill on those orders. So, we're making quite good progress on that front. And of course, the bulk of our efforts, as you can therefore understand, is focused currently on getting those sensors manufactured at scale. And as anybody would appreciate in this field, going from a bench scale to a pilot scale to commercial scale is complicated enough. And then when you have to go on a commercial scale from making a few thousand to a few tens of thousands to millions of sensors, brings with it its own challenges. And of course, we're gradually aiming to ramp that up and ensure that we're in a position where hopefully within the coming quarters and in the next year or so, where we can actually manufacture sensors in their millions every month, because that's the kind of uptake that we expect or we anticipate, given that we are not only targeting the medical market, but also the consumer space. With the type 2 diabetes management program that we've developed, the BEAT diabetes program. So in a nutshell, what this program is you have an app which provides you guidance and feedback in terms of general lifestyle, dietary, exercise, medication, etc. And then you have the sensor feedback, which talks about the extent to which you're actually managing your sugar fluctuations. And in addition to that, where necessary, there can be coaching as well. And we're at term sheet stage with Eversana, who have a sales force of greater than 6,000. And the objective there is that they will go out there and they will sell our service into corporate clients and healthcare insurers. And the great thing about this offering is that there are insurers and corporates already taking up these types of programs from several other offerings that are out there. But these offerings are very expensive. So we expect to come in highly competitive, number one, but also with a device that potentially is going to be more acceptable to users, in the sense that it's not something they have to wear 2-3 weeks at a go. Is something they only potentially need to wear 2 or 3 days at most at the end of each month. And of course, the associated costs, because when you look at some of these invasive sensors, you are looking at anything up to $150 for a 10 to 14 day sensor, whereas here we could be looking at as little as $15 to $20 for 2 or 3 sensors at the end of each month. So again, from a cost perspective as well, this we expect to be highly attractive to the payers. And of course, we are absolutely aiming for reimbursement in the management of type 2 diabetes with our program. And in due course, we'll see how that progresses. And the last offering is the consumer space. And in the consumer space, it is about metabolic health. And really, so what is metabolic health? All these jargon that is being thrown around in the media regarding managing your health using sugar monitors. The bottom line is, it is really measuring insulin sensitivity. To what extent is your body able to maintain low sugar levels without causing huge big spikes and long durations of high sugar levels? Because that potentially indicates the extent to which you are potentially pre-diabetic, or in some cases, people who are already have diabetes. And bear in mind, there are there was an article in Forbes recently where they spoke about this, and they said, whilst you have about 90 million people in the US with pre-diabetes, you have almost 1.5 million of those becoming type 2 every year, on top of the 30-odd million that already have type 2 diabetes in the US. So again, when you think about it, it's a huge opportunity and a huge unmet need. And again, we're coming in with something, a sensor that is hopefully a lot more acceptable to the user, and the costs are a lot lower. And currently we're running some trials with the NHS, and some of the results we've had back have been very promising, and we intend to publish those in due course as well. Market size, well, in Europe alone, you have over 50 million people with diabetes. If I take the US, you have over 30 million people with type 2. And if you take the metabolic health space, well, in the US, you have over 87 million people with that are pre-diabetic. Most don't actually know it, and about 1.5 million transitioning to become type 2. So when you consider it from that perspective, the services and offerings that currently exist have only just touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of their ability to be adopted en masse. So there is a huge opportunity there for us. And of course, we intend to partner with the right types of companies to be able to exploit our product in the market in due course. And as in terms of competitive landscape, there's just one, I mean, you can look at Dexcom and you can look at Abbott and all the rest of it, and you can see the kinds of revenues they're generating, in the billions now for their sensors per year. But let's just take the consumer space, I think, because that's a really interesting space, especially for the type of sensor that we have, whether you look at type 2 diabetes management or the consumer space. And here's an example of a company that only, I think, 6 or 7 years ago had revenues sub 20 million. And yet last year in 2020, it was about 400. And this year, I understand it's due to be almost double that figure. And remember, they are purely offering a program through an app to help people improve their health. Okay. And so what we're talking about here is not only the program, but something tangible as feedback to those users using a highly flexible sensor technology. And so that kind of gives you an indication of the sheer scale of the opportunity that exists. And of course, we intend to intend to exploit that as far as possible. Lastly, from a regulatory perspective, as I mentioned earlier, we have Class IIb medical device approval in Europe, FDA PMA submitted and under review with 2 audits already conducted. And future product opportunities, there's one big opportunity that we're looking at as our next product, and that is lactic acid monitoring, because it has huge applications. Although there's a clinical application, we're initially going to be looking at the consumer application in terms of athletic performance monitoring. And again, it's a bit like your Garmin's and Fitbits. Once one person or one, you have a few athletes wearing these, everybody wants one. But at least importantly, it's not a gimmick. It gives you some tangible feedback with regards to the stamina or, the health and well-being of an individual with respect to their ability to perform exercises, and the amount of acid that builds up over time gives an indication of their level of fitness, because obviously what you want is a small spike and then a drop quickly, rather than a prolonged duration of lactic acid buildup. So again, it gives you some very nice tangible feedback for individuals to go on. And then there are other applications that we will be looking at in due course. With respect to IP, we have both patents, some granted, some approved, some still pending, and we have some that are yet to be published as well. So, and importantly, I'll point out that we have a lot of know-how relating to the sensor technology and the algorithm for that matter. And the one thing I would point out is at least one of our granted patents on the algorithm side of things. It kind of future-proofs us to an extent, in that when we are in future potentially looking at how can we potentially eliminate the device and just have a sensor that can work off the back of let's say a smartwatch or something of that nature. One of our algorithms at least caters for that, in that it allows us to measure glucose on a cumulative basis, which is essentially what you would get if you were trying to measure it using some kind of optical detection technology. So again, from a future perspective. So in summary, we're already revenue generating. We have the audits in progress with the FDA. We have a first mover advantage with a non-invasive sensor platform, quite simple revenue generation models, and it is, as you will hopefully appreciate, a highly scalable business model. So that's really all I wanted to say today, and thank you very much. And Robert, any questions?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Chaudhry, again for your presentation here. My first question is, I was listening to a podcast not that long ago that was really starting to talk about the importance of folks starting to monitor their continuous glucose monitoring. And it was on it was major podcasts or on one of the major channels, and the woman on it is the founder and CEO of a company called Levels. I'm not sure if you've heard of that.
I've heard of Levels, yes.
Okay. So how is what Nemaura is creating unique and different from what Levels is looking to do, and has maybe some of the exposure that Levels has gotten because it has a lot of Silicon Valley support, has that streamlined or helped Nemaura in any way?
So in terms of helping us, if I work backwards, the nice thing is that there is a lot of activity in this space. And when you look at the investments that are going in, they are substantial investments going in, because people are realizing a couple of things. One, that, metabolic health and well-being is extremely important to stave off long-term chronic disease conditions. Secondly, in particular from this whole COVID pandemic thing, what we're finding is that people have become a lot more proactive with their health. Okay, so you combine those and you've got, the right conditions to be able to make these offerings. The thing is, however, is glucose monitoring the right way to do it? Do you put it this way? If you have 3 donuts, you're going to spike your sugar level. Okay, and so generally you can already look at the glycemic index of foods, and you can determine, okay, what's going to give you a spike, what isn't. And also, if you read a little bit further, you also realize that, well, actually, I'm not going to get the same spike from 2 donuts as I would if I had those 2 donuts on an empty stomach as opposed to on a half full stomach. Because, of course, by the time that is digested and absorbed, it takes time, right? And so you may end up with a more steady profile rather than a sharp profile. So these are things that you can educate people on quite quickly without having to have them wear sensors continuously. However, what is important is to establish that, well, if I stick to a certain regimen in terms of dietary, exercise, etc., over time, am I maintaining my body's ability to deal with sugar? I.e., from that point of view, what I mean is, am I avoiding spikes, really sharp spikes? Am I avoiding becoming pre-diabetic, for example? And so on the one hand, whilst with the likes of what Levels are offering, it sounds great and it sounds really interesting. What we're actually targeting is slightly different, in that we're saying that, well, you've got about 1.5 million people of the 90-odd million that have prediabetes that are at very high risk of becoming diabetic. That's 1.5 million. That's a huge number of people. That's more than the number of users that are using the Dexcom sensor, for example, right now, I think, roughly. And so to be able to get into an audience like that, the question is, well, how do you then deal with them? If you're going to stick a 14-day sensor on them, you've got a problem. Number one, that sensor has to come with a prescription. Number two, the cost of that sensor is anywhere up to $150. And we're trying to say, well, for $150 per year, potentially, or maybe a couple of $100 per year, we want to be able to manage an individual. And so that's where being able to just stick a sensor on for a couple of days, maybe at the end of each month, or at some point, maybe just a couple of sensors every quarter, to see, well, overall, is my sugar level actually managed? Do I avoid those peaks and troughs? That's really the key, as opposed to, I think the kind of thing that Levels are doing is like they're trying to almost personalize foods for you, etc. It's a tough ask, because people have habits and people have diets, and they, an Asian diet is different to, let's say, somebody in Russia compared to somebody in the Middle East, and so on and so forth. And people generally don't want to change their diets, but they do want to know how to live slightly healthy. And part of that is just, well, understand better about roughly what gives you spikes and what doesn't, and also importantly, potentially when you eat and the order of eating, for example. And so once you're educated on those aspects, it is really, from what we see, a case of just being able to keep yourself in check. Just like if you were to do a weight check every month, are you losing weight, are you gaining weight, etc. So on the one hand, it's interesting, but from our perspective, as I say, we're really going after that high risk category, but in a way that is hopefully sustainable and cost effective.
Absolutely. All right. So, you mentioned some, obviously some of your goals that you're looking to achieve for when you talked about them, were they more near term? Do you expect some of these revenue generating activities to happen in 2023? I mean, from what you can tell us, of course, and I know that can always be a moving target,
Sure.
but in your expectation, where do you hope to be?
So these are near term, certainly. So with, for example, the Beat Diabetes program with Eversana, we're planning to go, full force from Q1 onwards in the US with corporates and insurers. With respect to the Middle East, we have the provisional order in our hands. As soon as that registration comes through, we start then converting that into real order and start delivering on that. And of course, in the UK, our licensee has already been working with us to basically ramp up their activities. And part of that is, of course, the Duopack arrangement that I mentioned, whereby they're going to be looking to supply these sensors alongside medicines, which I think is a genius of an idea, to be honest, because you're kind of getting reimbursed through the back door in that medication is getting reimbursed and you're providing those sensors with that. So we do expect to see a lot of activity over 2023. But of course, with any commercialization activity, this is one of the reasons we've never given forecasts. I know analysts have given forecasts, but we haven't, because we know there's a ramp up period, and of course things will take off. But one thing I would point out is that we're not really interested in organic growth. So one of the other activities that we are now aggressively undertaking, because we believe we've reached that level of maturity to be able to do that, is we're looking for significant partnerships so that we can have partners that come in who can actually hit the ground running because they have the financial resources, they have the human resources and the infrastructure to be able to do that. And I'm referring here really not just about licensing out sugarBEAT. I'm referring here to the Beat Diabetes program and Miboko, the metabolic health program, because there are, you might kind of, it's almost counterintuitive to think that, there would be anybody other than, let's say, the likes of the Medtronics and Dexcoms of this world that might be interested in our sensors. But actually, we're thinking completely different in that we're thinking more consumer-orientated companies that are a lot more aggressive in this field and a lot more hungrier to be able to get these kind of products out there because of the potential longevity of these types of offerings.
Absolutely. All right. So my final question for you, and I'm asking this to all the companies presenting here today. We're going through tough markets right now. What measures is Nemaura taking to manage some of these macroeconomic pressures that are currently affecting most microcap companies across the board?
So one of the most important things is that you've got to be in a position where you've got enough cash to be able to continue operations. That's really important. So of course, from our perspective, we've got a fantastic lender on board. We've not had to go out there dilute. We've not had to take on warrants, options, et cetera, et cetera. So from that perspective, we're reasonably comfortable. And in due course, as needed, we will of course look at where we stand with regards to further funding. But the other thing is, of course, it goes back to the point I've just made just earlier, and that is the partnerships. For us, it is now really about getting those partners on board, because then we can focus on what we do best, which is develop the technology, manufacture, supply, and have these partners on board to help exploit these commercial markets around the world. That's really, I would say, where our core focus is in terms of managing the macroeconomic environment. But also bear in mind that in many ways, whilst the environment from an economic perspective and from the point of view of the impact on the capital markets is not great, the clinical need cannot be underestimated. It is a huge unmet, clinical need at the moment, and it has been for some time. And therefore, both insurers and health corporates, payers, everybody is looking for ways to ensure A, better health of individuals, and B, how do you do it in the most cost-efficient way? So in that sense, I think we're fortunate enough to be quite well positioned to be able to cater for those. And so the rest is going to come down to execution. And so we're diligently working on how we execute now.
Absolutely. Well, with that, Dr. Chaudhry, thank you so much for your participation today, your presentation, and also answering a few of my questions. To everyone watching, thank you for participating as well, and have a great rest of your conference. Dr. Chaudhry, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.